All right, I'm going to split this video up into two parts. One is a bit of a rant, because why not? So that's going to be a separate video, but this video is going to be more about the kind of health effects of the rant. Yeah? Because what I've noticed is that over the past 2 years, right, I've been really struggling mentally with a lot of stuff that's happening out in the world today, especially in the software industry, especially around things like AI and things like just trying to find the new center and the new direction, right? Just lost, really, just feeling really lost. So I want to explain a bit of my story about, like, how did it go from lost to now, being a bit more clean shaven, a little bit more hopeful. So back in 2024, one of the things that I noticed was that a lot of things were happening in the software industry. One word that's being used quite a lot is called restructure and layoffs. Those are the two corporate words for we didn't pay our bills. So basically, what's happening there is a lot of engineers were panicking. A lot of them were saying, right, okay, I don't know whether or not I'm going to have a job tomorrow. What's going on? What is happening to our positions? Are we going to be merging? What's happening? Now, at this time, I was working on some code, like you do. Within DevOps, you work on code, you do all this sort of stuff, and trying to figure out some architectures. Now, for me, figuring out architecture is relatively simple, right? As soon as I know what the function is in the basic terms, I can figure out kind of where roughly 80% of the stuff's going to go. But there are certain people within companies that don't care about that. They don't actually care where you put it, and they don't really want to help you because they have different agendas to you. And this is quite detrimental to not only your health but physical health, because you want to do a good job. And I found myself even in that situation where it just became intolerable, because the amount of effort that was being put in did not reflect the amount of effort that was being put back. And not only that, it did not even reflect the level of help and the level of acuity that was needed for doing anything. And that was really catastrophic, because essentially what that's told me was that the environment that I had known in the company was changing. And the people that were supporting me had unfortunately left. They had left the building, which is always a wake-up call, by the way, in career, to say, now it's time to leave. Because if you stay there longer, it's just going to affect your mental and physical health. Um, so that part happened. So what happened after that? Well, there was a bit of a thing that I wish I had done. Within that particular time space, what I wish I had done was gone on holiday. I wish I went to Thailand. I wish I went to Philippines. I wish I went just to go and see some of my friends. I did end up going to Thailand in that time, but the timing that I did it on was a bit kind of bad, mainly because there was another offer on the table, and me and my kind of infinite wisdom, if you like, um, did not really see the value of the opportunity that was presented in front of me. Now, I blame myself for that. I don't blame anybody but myself for that, because at the end of the day, taking an opportunity is kind of important. Why did I not take it? Well, there was a couple of things happening in my life at this time. One of the things that was really quite prominent for me was health. Now, I was trying to do a little bit more in health, to the point that I became a PT, which I'm really proud of. But at the same time, the problem with this is that getting a lot of people to kind of be with you in PT is a bit daunting, because basically who I thought my friends were in the particular environment didn't turn out to be my friends. They were just there kind of having a party, and yeah, that was detrimental for me, because I was basically told, like, yeah, you're guaranteed to get in, you can do what you need to, we're really happy that you've applied, and blah 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 and all this kind of stuff. And then somebody else gets it. It's like, all right, okay, fine, maybe they're more qualified, maybe they're more experienced, whatever, fine. But then I just said to myself, like, I better be careful here, because these are not my friends. These are not people that they're just people that look like your friends, but they're not. So that's one thing that I've kind of experienced very, very quickly in that journey. And speaking of health, like I found a lot of people in the health industry be very, very, they're very, very cool people, very, very cool. Very, very knowledgeable. They have a lot of empathy, very willing to help. And it was one of my kind of aspirations was to say, right, okay, I want to go do some stuff with health. And that kind of led me on to my next level of journey, which is kind of mental and physical health. What I realized after that time was that mentally, I didn't really have like a plan. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have any sort of like way out. I knew I wanted to start a business. I knew I wanted to do something for myself. I knew that I had to because I just didn't trust. I didn't really trust corporate. And the reason being for that is literally because of all the stuff that goes on. I know a lot of people talk about politics. A lot of people talk about other people. A lot of people talk about the confinement, the lack of creativity, all of this sort of stuff. And I thought to myself, well, I look at these entrepreneurs, and one of the things that was really interesting to me was the management of time. A lot of people when, they've told me, we have to go through the grind, it takes 3 years, 4 years, 5 years to get established. But after that, you can be pretty good. It's like, okay. So I tried. I bought a tutor. I paid for a tutor. I paid for a business mentor, multi-million pound guy. Pretty good. I'll be honest. He was pretty good. And, I tried to stick out with a project, go for it, thinking that I'm going to have some sort of edge, some sort of thing. Then comes the problem, which is like, okay, you stick at it, you go for it, you go for it, you go for it, you go for it, you try, but then nothing happens. Like nobody's really engaging. And this is what gets interesting because for me, what I found was that, apparently there's this whole thing about talking to people, you got to go there, talk. The problem is people don't know who you are. You see, so there's this dichotomy that I find really dumb with a lot of these kind of business courses, which is like, if nobody knows who you are and you're going to somebody saying that you can do something, right, then why should they trust you? And I've not, like, even in, so I'm on Tom Bilyeu's course, and even in Tom Bilyeu's course, what I find just amazing is that they can't answer this question. They just say, oh, you need to talk to more people, your sample size needs to be bigger. Well, why would they talk to me? That question hasn't been answered yet. And then they turn around and say, oh, but you use your experience and all this kind of stuff. No. They don't know you. It's not about you going there and talking to hundreds of people. They don't know who you are. You have no leg to stand on as a new business, right? For them to even trust you. So why would they spend their time, right, talking to you? And this was the one that really annoyed me to the point that I was like, I just don't want to go back. I'll pay for it because, it's cheaper than me paying £1,000, But at the same time, I need to figure out that answer to the question. Now, I met one coach who was very, very, very good at this sort of stuff because they worked in sales, right? And I thought to myself, this was brilliant, right? This was interesting for me because what she said was do your homework on the person. Do the homework, then send them the message, then send them the DM. She said, and do this for like a couple of days. Understand the company, understand the individual. What are the pain points? Look for that data, look for that telemetry, right? Because she used to do cold calling, cold email even. And I thought to myself, this is absolutely fantastic. This is the sort of stuff that I was struggling with, Now, the thing is, to get that implemented, I think is actually harder than, the knowledge itself. The knowledge itself, I think, is the easy part, right? But getting that level of trust, I think, is pretty difficult. And I thought to myself, this is interesting. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do some stuff with that later on. But right now, let me continue with my story. So I did all that, and I thought to myself, okay, like, this is a bit harder. Like, I had this belief that David Bayer goes into the whole this belief system thing. I had this belief that, I could start a business. I still believe I can start a business, right? Still, to this day. The only problem is I don't know the steps. I don't know how to go from A to Z. Now, I can see it in my mind. I have a bit of an idea, but those steps, like that muddy path, right? And I really get why entrepreneurs say, like, this is such a difficult thing to do, because to go from A to Z, I still think it's very, very difficult. Like I'm making this video now, and it's already been 10 minutes, right, for this story, and like, it's quite difficult. So I said to myself, okay, in the beginning, before the PT stuff, I said to myself, I do want to go and have a look at the world. I want to be a little bit more invested, a little bit more helpful to people, understanding, different cultures, different things like that. So I did this assessment with another coach, which was like, your aligned work type stuff. Because I was like, okay, I don't really know my next move, but I want to have like a backup, like an insurance policy. So I decided to do TEFL, and I kind of enjoyed it, but I didn't really enjoy like the learning of the English because I speak English. But at the end of the day, I find it kind of rewarding in a sense because you get to see other countries, you get to experience different cultures, you get to travel, and then you get to say, you get to speak to different individuals and understand where they're coming from. And that was one of the reasons why I did it. I just thought to myself, you know, it's £300 or whatever, do the course, get your level 5, go in, you know, do what needs to be done, and if they come back to you, good. If they don't, keep applying, keep trying. So I was like, that's pretty good. Like, and a couple of opportunities here and there. So, really good, really, really good. So I wasn't like held back in any way by it. It was just like, this is pretty cool, you know, and it's something that I wouldn't mind doing. So I just said, okay, cool, it's fine. So, I started to kind of look at these different opportunities, try and look at some sort of like mesh amalgamation, this sort of thing. Then I started to look at Rewind, right? Rewired, which is one of my other channels, right? Like, which I think I'm pretty much on at the moment. So, right, I've got Multi-Tech Spec, Rewind, Worldwide Mental Health Project, all these kind of different channels, but nothing's really sticking. Everything's kind of like really just infantile. So it's like another knock, right? So knocking, knocking, knocking. And then I decided to do a bit more of one particular thing, which was meditation. So I started meditating, and I had a couple of tutors, mentors, which are nearby. I started meditation, and then what I found was really interesting, but I'll get back to that point in a minute. Let me talk about my mentors. So I had a mentor who's stocks and shares mentor. Well, I still do, in fact. So my stocks and shares mentor said, well, why don't you have a look at things like, commodities-based trading? I had a look. I was like, well, I'm already making a bit of money in my stocks and shares, and I've grown my portfolio. So that was really, really good. I'd set aside some money when I was working to go and do that stuff. So I was like, all right, this is cool. I can do this, And I looked at some of the patterns, and I came to the conclusion that AI, I agree with Michael Burry. I actually, as somebody who's worked in the industry, I agree with Michael Burry's assessment that the AI industry is basically a scam. I agree with his assessment entirely. I think that he's pulled out a little bit too early because of the retracement, right, which is going back up. But I can see where he is with Cyclone Capital to say, like, it's manipulated. I can see where it's going with that. That's why I said, right, okay, I'm gonna consolidate down to not being able to release what my plays are. Which I don't blame him, to be honest. I really don't blame him. But what I will say is that it's only a matter of time. There's not enough energy, not enough contracts for data centers, and essentially what I've come to the conclusion is the software that's being created is rubbish. It's not even worth the time. So if these three factors are in effect, right, what is actually keeping it going? Well, it's market manipulation, basically. So I was like, okay, cool. Like, if there's market manipulation at play, we can take advantage of that. It's not a problem, right? Because at the end of the day, what else am I going to do? Right? I can make these videos, I can help people, and that's what I want to do. I want to be able to help people in some capacity. So that's what I done. I went on the stock market, and then I made a bit of money, And what I'm saying is that, despite this being my entire story, is that there are different ways and means to do things, different ways and means, and it's worth exploring. I think that we live in a bit of a society which kind of states, you need to focus, you need to focus, you need to focus. Yes, I'm not saying no, right? But what is it all for? What is the end result? What is the end goal? What is it that you're trying to achieve? Because focus without direction is just wandering. I've been doing that for literally 2 years at this point, right? It's just wandering, right? There's no direction. So I think, one of the things that I would say to anybody in that position of, a similar story to mine, where you're trying to figure things out and trying to see, what is the encampment, right? What is the thing that's really going to do it? Is you're better off trying and failing than not trying at all. Because at least if you try, you've got a chance at making, £5, £10, £20, £50, right? Yes, it's probably worth having a mentor. I agree. Having a mentor kind of helps. The problem is try and find one that works with you in your favor for what you want to do. Because what I find is that there's too many mentors out there who are just after your money. They're not going to do anything. They'll just be like, all right, how many people did you talk to today? And you were doing what? Sitting there and looking pretty. This is the thing, you see, oh, you need to take action. Okay, and what action should I be taking exactly? Did you talk to 300 people today? About what? About your business. All right, and what makes you think they trust me? Well, what's your experience and what's all this and what's all that? Do you think that people really care for that? Or are they more interested in themselves? Is that the part that you forgot to mention? Yeah, it is. So there we go, right? Because like what I'm saying is certain books, for example, make this really clear, right? One that Hamza talks about is called How to Win Friends and Influence People, which talks about the psychology of people in general. Now, I hate reading the book, right? It's one of the books that I just despise because my brain works like in a different way. So basically, when I see some of these examples that he talks about, like for example, there's one about hard hats, right? There's one about hard hats, like wearing hard hats, and the guy talks about, in the 1930s, people weren't wearing hard hats, and it's going to cause injury and all this kind of stuff in one of the passages. And you think to yourself, well, that's really obvious, in the modern day, that's really obvious, you just go there, you wear a hard hat, like, things can fall from a building site. Now, I can say that because I actually went on a course to do dry lining. And one of the things that they tell you is wear your PPE. Always on the site, wear PPE. Why? Because there's stuff flying everywhere. It's going to get into your eyes, it's going to get on your head, so having all that protection makes it easier. Right? But back in the 1930s, the people just didn't give a damn, right? When I went to New York, right, and I looked at the, what's that famous building, the big one? I forget the name. It's not the Chrysler building, but it's one of the other ones, right? Where you can go in and there's a museum and then you get people like, looking at building the building, right, in the 1930s. And what I found very interesting was that people weren't wearing hard hats. They were literally going from I-beam to I-beam, right, with their shoes, not wearing any harnesses, nothing, right? Now, if it turned around and said, somebody had died as a result, and therefore the manager was telling all the people to say, maybe we should think about this, I would have been like, okay, that's fine, right? But I can see the sentiment. One of the other ones in that book that really annoyed me was the airplane one. There's an example about an airplane test pilot. Now, I got really annoyed with that one because it basically showed incompetence. Because in the airline industry today, right, you are not allowed, right, even though it probably happens, you are not allowed to fill up an aircraft with a different form of fuel as to what's stated in the regulations. Why is that? Because of contamination, cross-contamination with different pollutants, right? All this sort of health and safety procedures that would basically mean the aircraft that you're flying would go down. It would just not fly, right? It would make things like crystalline structures inside of the engine, right? In fact, there's one that was on one of the channels like Mentor Pilot, right, which talks about this in a lot more detail. It's fantastic stuff, absolutely fascinating to see, right, how the technology in aircraft has evolved over time. Now, in the book, one of the things that it talks about was that, you know, one of the pilots, like Chuck Yeager or one of these kind of guys, was flying a plane, right? Excuse me. And as he was flying the plane, one of the things that was interesting was that the person who was his mechanic dealing with the plane had put the wrong fuel inside the aircraft. So what happens when you put the wrong fuel inside the aircraft, right? Because those are piston engines, right? So I'm not sure if it was petrol or diesel that they were flying, but you know, if you got put diesel, you know, you put diesel in a petrol engine, it's just not going to work. Right, there's somebody at my door. I'll be there in a second. Yeah, so it's just not going to fly. Why is that? Why is it not going to fly? Because in order to get diesel to ignite, it has to go through a very vicious combustion cycle at pressures higher than that of petrol. That's why. Right? And that compressor with the spark plug attached is what causes the ignition. That was what causes combustion. So, whilst this pilot was flying the plane, right, he noticed that the flight controls were not working properly, the ailerons, right, you know, you've got your slats, all that kind of stuff weren't working. So they probably didn't have slats back in those days, but definitely ailerons. So ailerons weren't working, flight controls were not really that good. So what happens? Well, he crashes the plane, right, as he would. But the mechanic was distraught, right? So distraught with his actions that he was forgiven by the pilot and said, "Oh yeah, you can become like my chief mechanic," sort of thing. I sat there and I was like, that would never happen today. The guy would have been fired. Like the guy would have lost his job, lost his livelihood. The guy would have just been out on the street, you know. But to go there and say, "Oh yeah, we show compassion," I'm like, you nearly died. What do you mean? Like what? Like really? Like what do you mean? You nearly died by this accident from a mechanic that should have known better. And that's where I kind of just lost it with the book, you know, with the How to Win Friends and Influence People, because it's just a bit unrealistic as to what would happen in the modern day. And maybe that's a sign of the changing times, right? The book was written in the 30s, you know, it's 2026, it's only 100 years old, that book. You know, I don't know, maybe that's just me, I don't know, right? But that's what I kind of think about with that book is like, yeah, I get the point, you're supposed to be compassionate, 100%, right? But I think there's a limit in certain scenarios as to how that works. Now, maybe I'm not reading the book correctly, and there's probably a deeper hidden meaning. You know, like Hamza looks at that book and says, you know, he really loves it. I, on the other hand, have looked at it and I thought, I kind of understand what it's talking about, but at the end of the day, it's kind of like, you know, some of the examples given, I think, are what, like the examples is what makes me not want to read the book. The actual principles is what makes me want to read the book. Yeah? Because the principles are really, really good. Like there's one principle which talks about, you know, investing in the other person by making them speak more about themselves. Really, really interesting psychology. Really, really interesting. And it works. It works. Like talking, like go on any dating app and just try and find out more about the other person and get them talking about shit. It's insane. It genuinely works. But yeah, that's one of the things, right? When starting out, you know, with a business is like getting the other person to talk more about themselves and then closing the deal when they feel emotionally comfortable is one of the things that I've learned throughout this process. So yeah, where does that land with others? You know, what's the takeaway here? I'll say that if you're in this position where you're kind of feeling a bit lost, right? Regulate the amygdala. That's the first thing. And that's the first thing that I wish I had done, right? Because I did have a fairly regulated amygdala, but I didn't see the other steps, right? So it's like exercise, you know, going to the gym, riding a bike, right? But more better and interestingly is be creative, because it's a chance to become creative, right? If we're not creative, we don't have a way out of it. We don't have a way of detaching ourselves from the situation. So it's really important to harness creativity. And it's one of the things that I've noticed is being creative is not a bad thing. It's actually the thing that sets you apart. It really is the thing that sets you apart, because think about it. Like we could all be logical all day. Like, you know, and then talk about anything, right? But where's the passion? Where's the heart? Where's the je ne sais quoi, right? Where's all of that stuff? Where's all the stuff that makes it imperfect, right? Where's all that stuff that says, you don't have to have it all figured out. You don't have to know all the steps. You don't have to be so entangled with the problem. And I think that's one of the things that entrepreneurship allows you to do, is just be less entangled with the problem and more entangled with the work and the output that you want to have to provide the value that you want people to see. And that's one of the things that I think is really interesting about entrepreneurship. It's a creative way of doing it. I think the main problem is, well, how do you get there and make money at the same time? That's the problem, right? That's the main problem. And it's probably why it's not for everyone. Yeah, right? But again, meditation is probably the best one. Why? Because although Dr. K talks about stuff like, Ayurvedic philosophy, with meditation, you got to chant your mantras 108 times, and then put it in your mind, then focus on your nose, all this sort of stuff, yeah? Good. But there is a science behind the madness. Now, when we're stressed, right, the body releases cortisol, releases stress hormones. Now, that stress hormone basically enables something called flight, fight, or freeze mechanisms. Now, when we're in one of these states, right, we don't know, as a human being, whether or not we're running from a bear, being chased by a lion, or the world is crashing and falling and burning. Yeah, we have no mechanism to even suggest what's going on. So if we have no mechanism to suggest what's going on, right, our brain cannot distinguish. We feel more fear and more anxiety as a result. So why do I say meditate? Because by going through meditation, right, our state of breathing is altered. Now, in an anxious state, right, or some people call it the non-powerful state, what happens is our breathing is more shallow. We're not able to take in that tight breath, right? That actually helps us to calm down and regulate our heart rate. This is why sometimes, right, when we're in a really anxious state, it's better to go boxing than it is to go and do weights. Yes, you'll feel more tired, right? But the cardiovascular implications will actually help regulate the nervous system. How interesting is that? Right? It would actually help because we're now breathing more fully and we don't have time to respond to the anxiety that we have. Yes, we'll come back to the anxiety after the event has finished, right? Because the actual circumstances that we're in hasn't changed. And we're looking for that change. We're looking for that change. We're trying to become the change that we need. The problem is, it's a painful process to get there. So with the meditation, right, we heal the mind by basically saying, okay, we're focusing on another thing, be it our nose, right? Very famous method is like our nose, focusing on our nose. And then we're trying to clear the mind, as Dr. K says, right? Dr. K has a good episode on this. Please watch it. It's really good. Yeah. Better than what I can explain in this terms, in terms of what he talks about, because he's been a monk for, I think, 5 or 6 years now, or whatever. I'm not sure exactly how long, but he talks about it in really good terms. So, by doing the meditation, right, we increase the breathing rate, it calms down the amygdala, and it stops us from going into fight, flight, or freeze, which means that we can execute more work. Right? It's really strange, right? Sitting down and doing nothing. You do nothing for 15 minutes. Between 5 and 15 minutes, you do nothing. Or as my coach likes to say, fuck all. Yeah? Basically. Yeah, I'm not holding back on this. This is my work, so there we go. Yeah, so you do F all, yeah? So by doing that, what happens? Well, you start to calm down, you start to think a bit more clearly. Yeah? The fight, flight, and freeze responses are no longer a threat. It's just that you accept it to become the opportunity to become better. And that's where you want to be, because now we're going from that, less powerful state, stress, anxiety, all of that stuff that David Baer talks about, into the more powerful state of, okay, there is something that I can do here. I am anxious, I am nervous, I am in fear, but there is something that I can do to help me come out of this state of fear, out of this state of anxiety, so that I can pursue a goal without being entrapped in it. Right? Because we can become so focused on a goal, we can become trapped by it. Right? Oh, we must do this. We must. Yes, you must. Of course you must. But why put so much pressure on it now? You haven't even moved. Haven't done anything. So relax. As my other mentor talks about, dance in the rain. Right? And this is the part that I think a lot of coaches miss out on, because they don't talk about the creative factor in the transformation. There's a creative element to it. There has to be. Otherwise, you're just sitting there doing, it's like doing bench press and not being infused by it. Like you just go there, like, what are you doing? I don't know. I'm working out. Therefore, my muscles will get stronger. Yes, true. But is your form correct? Is the breathing correct? Are you using the right techniques? Are there stuff that you can do more to make it better? No, we just have to get fit. I mean, the amount of times I've seen that in a gym, right? Or you go to like BoxFit, right? And what do? What is this? What is this? Like are you doing a Macarena? Like, are you pretending to be on the bag? Where you do right, that sort of stuff, right? But even then, like the jabs are not thrown properly, the crosses are not done properly. The body hooks are not in. The really basic one, right? Your hand on your cheek, right, to protect your guard, right, to do the block, right, all that sort of stuff. That's not done properly. And it's supposed to be a BoxFit type gym type thing, right? With a slight twist on martial arts. So this is what I'm talking about. Sometimes we have a little bit more choice than what we think, and we can do a little bit more than what we thought we could do. And it's a really, really powerful thing. It's something that we should always remember in those dark times, that we can do more. Like, it's just a case of understanding that although we're in fear, or we are in a very dark place, the opportunity of not trying is worse than the opportunity of trying. Right? Right? Am I right? Right? Because if we didn't try, right, we won't get. If I don't talk to the pretty girl down the street, she's not going to know who I am. So I think the first thing we need to do is reprogram the mind to say, we need to try for opportunity. Because if we don't try for opportunity, then we've lost the battle. We've lost the entire game. If you like. People like games, so we'll talk about games. Right? Or you lost the entire opportunity, if you like that word more. Right? The entire opportunity is lost. So we must tune the body and the mind to seek the opportunity. Right? So that way we can become what we want. And this is the process that I think works best. Because otherwise we'll just get completely lost. Anyway, that's all I have for you today. I hope you've enjoyed this particular video. It explains some of my story, explains some of the stuff that I've had a look at to get more onto the right path. And I hope that it helps, and I hope that you learned something today. If you'd like more information, please contact me, and I'll be happy to talk more about some of the stuff that I've gone through and coach you through some of the stuff that I've done as well. Yeah? Better within the mind and the body. All right. I'll see you in the next one.